This is the Collaboration Dynamics Podcast, helping you work together better with Judy Reese, X-Ray listener, best-selling author, international virtual collaboration trainer, and master of metaphor. Hear more at xraylistening.com.
How do you read the energy in a meeting? That's today's big question. I've been talking to Brian McKinney, who's been managing meetings of academics in Texas for many years. We've been finding out how he does it and using questioning, listening, and metaphor to get under the skin of the stuff that he didn't know he knew how to do. This interview works on multiple levels, and do take notes. This is going to be fun. On the line with me today, I've got Brian McKinney. Hello, Brian.
Hello.
Thanks for being here. Would you like to introduce yourself and what you do in the collaboration line?
Oh, I'm semi-retired from the collaboration line now. I used to work in a university where I would keep a lot of people trying to work together, kept trying to help a lot of people work together. And that included not only within my own university, but I was within a university system. And so I worked with people from the various universities that were part of this system to keep them aligned and on track. And I also worked with the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, where I chaired a statewide committee of universities and community colleges for several years.
Great stuff, thank you. So, when you are, or when you were, working at your best in collaboration, that was like what? My best way of thinking about this is, I guess I have a couple of ways of thinking about it. My best way is thinking of it in terms of equilibrium. We all, when we walk and run and dance and all those other things that we do, maintain a kind of balance or equilibrium. Balance equilibrium is always a more interesting word to me because it lets us know that we're managing a lot of forces from a lot of different directions and so on. Similarly, when you're working with other people to collaborate, one of the things that is very important is working with all of the energy that's in the room or in the project or in the endeavor, whatever it may be, and attempting to keep those people and all of that energy balanced and in a sort of equilibrium that allows people to move forward with ease and even sometimes a kind of grace without getting into disagreements, fights, and so on like that. At least managing those in sort of contained kind of ways. Mm. And a very old metaphor that I started with many years ago was a kind of military based metaphor. When I was working with other people, I always saw there were three different things that had to be done. One is I saw myself back in the day, as we say now, as a kind of walkie-talkie, so that people, I endeavored to assist people in communicating with each other, with one another all around the group and so on like that, and making sure people had channels to communicate on. And the other one was as a jeep, and the jeep, of course, is the one that brings people from one place to another and keeps them in some kind of direct contact outside the group. So the jeep brings the general or the colonel into the unit, and he says a few words and gets to know the soldiers, and then moves on to another group and so on like that. Mm-hmm. But that kind of face-to-face, or at least very heavy attention, is also an important part of this. And then the final role, of course, was as the tank, which is there's times where you just have to move things forward and run over people. And you keep that in reserve as long as you can, but once in a while it has to come out. I got to where I almost never had to be the tank, because if you do enough communicating and working with people and helping them to work with each other, then tanks become less useful.
So if you do enough of the walkie-talkie and the Jeep...
Right. You don't need the tank.
You don't need the tank.
That's right. Jeep is not a limousine. It's not one of these black sedans that important people ride around in. It's one of these utility vehicles that it enabled. It was the kind of thing that enabled a lot of informal meetings rather than formal meetings. I started very early in my career doing what I used to call rounds. I would go talk to the people that I needed to interact with from time to time and make sure that everything was okay with them. And I carried this over into the projects I was working with and so on like that. And that would mean I would go around and stop at their office and just happen to be in the area and chat with them for kind of 10 minutes and so on like that, just to maintain relations and so forth. And rather than having formal meetings and things like that. So Jeep is a very informal, utility-driven vehicle.
It's interesting you should describe that kind of situation, because a lot of people, when they're working with teams remotely, say that's the bit that they miss the most, the opportunity to just drop in on someone's office.
It is a very important kind of thing, it seemed to me.
And so the walkie-talkies and the Jeep, and you wouldn't need the tank. And equilibrium. Is there a relationship between that Jeep, walkie-talkies and tank metaphor and the equilibrium?
I think there is. I think the Jeep walkie-talkie tank is an early attempt to find this, which I later began to understand as equilibrium. You maintain the energy balance among a lot of people, among a lot of moving parts, as we sometimes say, and that maintains equilibrium. And if you have equilibrium, people are able to move forward with balance and with ease, and they don't get tangled up in other kinds of things. And I think the walkie-talkie Jeep tank was an early way of trying to articulate what I was trying to achieve, that equilibrium. I tend to just read it as energy now.
So you tend to read it as energy. And when energy like that and the energy balance between lots of moving parts, is there anything else about that energy balance?
It absolutely fascinates me to watch the energy in a project, the energy in a room during a meeting, for example, or the energy in a project overall, and to be able to see where the critical points are and what energy needs attention and so on like that. It's I used to talk about, I still talk about reading the energy in a room or reading the energy in a project, and people don't usually understand what I mean, but they are they tend to respond to what I do somehow. So
when
that was nice.
When you're reading the energy in a room and you can see where the critical points are, what lets you know that there's a critical point there?
I really don't have any sense of how to tell you how that happens. I sometimes I can I can attribute it to, I can say, oh, well, it was the body language of the person, or it was the expression on his face, or it was something else. But often it's not even that obvious. It's something much more abstract. And I was never able to bring that all the way into consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
I've been reading a novel by William Gibson, where a guy talks about reading data.
Mm-hmm.
He's a quantitative analyst, and he talks about finding nodal points. And everybody says, well, what's a nodal point? He says, I don't know. I just find them. And I'm in that kind of position, I guess, with this. I don't know how I do this all.
Mm. What happens for you when you find one? What's the first thing that you notice in you when you find one of those nodal points or critical points?
Well, there's an increasing shift of attention, I guess. There's a particular thing will get more attention from me, and I'll start to think how something needs to be responded to, I guess. Every additional attention, not perhaps a little bit of a discomfort, but certainly my attention is drawn toward particular things.
Mm-hmm. So your attention is drawn, and the little bit of discomfort, but it's about what something needs to be responded to, or how something needs to be responded to. Mm-hmm. And whereabouts is that little bit of discomfort?
Yeah, I guess it's tricky thing. I guess it's often in a kind of energy field or a field around my head somehow, in my head and shoulders somehow. I start feeling almost like little tugs from particular directions around my head and sometimes my shoulders and back a little bit too.
In that energy field around your head?
Yeah.
And then what happens?
And then I often will focus in visually on the person or the area, and it's not always a person. It's sometimes a particular issue that a lot of people feel uncomfortable with, and then it's the issue that needs the attention rather than a particular person. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting kind of thing that way.
And then what do you do?
Well, I bring it into specific consciousness of everybody. I would say things like, if it's a particular person, for example, I might say things like, my sense is that so-and-so has an issue with or has a question about this, or have we resolved this to your satisfaction, addressing a particular person on this. If it's an issue, generally I will say, well, I sense a certain amount of discomfort around this difficulty, this particular proposal, solution, whatever it is, and does anyone have any ways of understanding that, or the specific kinds of problems? And then several people always want to talk.
Mm-hmm. And then what happens to the equilibrium?
Well, it begins to shift.
Mm-hmm.
It begins to shift, and I'm remembering a particular time when I somehow read this wrong. Ooh, that was embarrassing.
That's what I used to chair these meetings for the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board committee, and we would deal with particular issues, and I was always pretty good at knowing when the issue was done and we could move on to the next one. And we actually finished an issue one time, and it kept coming up throughout the rest of the meeting, and the meeting was an all-day meeting. And I kept thinking, well, should I get the tank out and just say, look, we voted on this, shut up. But it was just, I don't know, that was a weird thing. Generally, it's the exception that tests the rule, I guess, but generally, when you start to move through an issue like that, then the tension subsides, the equilibrium tends to return, and people start refocusing themselves either on resolving the particular issue itself or on, if it gets resolved quickly, then on moving to the next thing.
Mm-hmm. And when the equilibrium returns, then move forward with ease and grace.
Yes.
Is there anything else about that ease and grace?
It's such an interesting thing to experience that. And I remember the first time I actually saw that work and figured out how the guy did it somehow. I got an intuitive grasp. I clearly had no conscious grasp of this. and perhaps not anything else. I'm just fooling myself. But I saw a guy do this, and I thought, oh, that's how you do that. And because it was such a great thing, and everybody in the room really experienced this at the same time. Everybody was suddenly, people who had been incredibly upset about a particular issue suddenly felt everything had been resolved to their satisfaction, because they had found the best possible solution given the situation of the entire group. Mm-hmm. And once the guy who was running the session recognized that, he said something like, "Are you ready to move on?" And everybody said, "Yeah." And I saw that ease, that shift of attention to the next thing. That was a good thing.
Mm-hmm. And when move forward with ease and grace like that, and equilibrium, and maintain the energy balance between lots of moving parts and all of that, when the equilibrium is like that, you are like what?
My metaphor used to be Kurt Wallinda, who walked the tightrope. And then I saw Cirque du Soleil, and I saw other people doing this in a much more complex kind of way. Mm-hmm. But it's like having that kind of ease and control, and which is really simply maintaining equilibrium altogether.
Like walking a tightrope, or like Cirque du Soleil doing the more complex thing.
Right.
And that ease, that grace, and that control.
Yeah. I think about a high jumper, for example, who has to have a lot of control as he hurls himself over that bar, and then he has to abandon himself to the forces. Mm-hmm. And if the equilibrium is right, he makes the jump.
And when all of that, and like that high jumper, control and then trusts himself to the forces, and ease and grace and moving forward like that, and equilibrium and the energy balance, and the old metaphor, the walkie-talkie, the jeep and the tank, and all of that, I'm curious, when we started this conversation, how much of that did you already know and how much is new?
Actually, quite a lot of this is new as we explored this. I had not explored this in this kind of depth before. Obviously, it was pretty clear on the walkie-talkie and the Jeep and so on like that. And but a lot of this is quite new. Trying to find the way this affects me, the way any kind of difficulty in these kinds of situations, how that affects me physically and mentally and so on. That's very new. So it's a good thing.
What difference does knowing it make?
Well, it enables me to, being more conscious of something certainly makes me, I think, better able to pay attention to that. Consciousness is just a focused kind of awareness, and while awareness can certainly get your attention, if you have more conscious attention, it may get your attention a little bit more quickly and make it work better. So I think it improves a little bit. You have to try it out.
Wasn't that interesting? I really enjoyed interviewing Brian. He's a fascinating man and an expert at doing something which is notoriously difficult, managing academics. So my three big takeaways from that interview. Number one was the importance that Brian placed on informal contacts in between the meetings, being the Jeep, going round, doing his rounds and just chatting. Now, you can replicate that in remote working environments, but it's just that little bit more complicated. You just need to put a bit more effort into doing it because you don't automatically meet people in the lift or at the coffee machine. But don't forget about it, it's really important. Another important takeaway I took from that was how Brian's metaphor for how he did what he did shifted over the years. So back in the day, he had this militaristic metaphor of the walkie-talkie, the Jeep and the tank. And then over the years, the tank became less and less needed, and he was able to keep things going in a different way. And this new metaphor emerged of how it was all about balancing the moving parts, the different forces in the room, maintaining equilibrium, and to a certain extent letting go of control, like the high jumper who at a certain point had to let go. The third big takeaway was how little of this Brian was aware of consciously, and yet he was doing it brilliantly. So by giving him a little bit of focused attention, inviting him to reflect on how he did what he does so well, he gained a lot more awareness of how it all works, such that he can try it out on his next meeting, and also potentially so he can share it with other people. In this case, he was able to share it with us. So I think we've got three big takeaways there. The importance of informal contacts, the fact that metaphors can change over the years, and how a little bit of attention to a metaphor and to how someone does something with some good questions and some good listening can really make a difference.